Life on the Moose. Today we're going to talk about land. Specifically, we're going to talk about the questions you should really ask yourself if you're involved in the process of looking to buy land for yourself. Who am I and what qualifies me to make this video? Well, my name is Patrick, first of all. Nice to meet you. Glad you stopped by. Aside from being a contractor on and off for the last 30 years, I've been a real estate broker in the state of Washington for 26 years now. I've been involved with hundreds of transactions involving vacant land. I've also been involved with the investment part of land. Owned property, bought property, sold property, fixed up property, cleaned up property. Today we're going to focus on buying land with the intent of building a house on it. That's what we're doing right here. I'm standing on Red Moose Ranch, and we built a few things like this cabin, and there's a barn back there, and a woodshed, and a cabin up in the hill. So we built everything except for the house. That's what's coming next. And more on that before the end of this video. And if you've never been to Life on the Moose before, I'm normally the one swinging the hammer on these projects, doing a little bit more work, a little bit less talk, but there's a lot of stuff to get to. So let's jump right in and talk about the 5 things you should ask yourself before you buy land. So number 1, the first question you should ask yourself is, what do I want? I know you might think this is the most ridiculously easy question in the world. Of course, I just want a piece of land for a cabin and a goat and a small garden. Well, deeper than that. Think deeper than that. What do you really want? What can you put up with? What can you deal with? So let me insert some clarifiers into that question. What do I want? Maybe, what size of parcel do I want? Again, this might seem like an easy question, and you might answer, as much as I can possibly buy for X amount of money. Really? Do you really want as much as you can buy? Is that more important than what is on the land? Do you really want to get a parcel that's 50 acres, 60 acres? Because the more land you have, the more you're going to have to deal with. You always have to consider maintenance. Do you have grass to upkeep? Are you going to have snow in the wintertime? Do you have to buy a tractor, a snowblower, a blade, a lawnmower, a brush hog? All that stuff just to maintain the property you have? There are a lot of easy questions you could insert, like, what terrain do I want? Do I want nothing but wild sage? Do I want forest? Do I want grasslands? So here's an interesting question you might think is obvious. What type of weather do I want? You might think, I want 75 and sunny every day. That's an easy one. Well, you probably won't get that, unless, of course, you're buying vacant land in San Diego, but good luck finding one affordable enough to build a cabin on. Can you stand 110 degrees? Would you rather be on the coast in Washington, for example, when it could be 40 degrees and raining, but at the same time, here in the mountain at 3,000 feet higher, it's 10 degrees below zero. So think about little things like that before you just say, oh, I could live anywhere. Really? What about amenities? Ask yourself, do I want to be an hour away from good grocery shopping? Do I want to be 2 hours away from a dentist? Do I want to be an hour and a half away from the nearest doctor? Can I live the rest of my life without Uber Eats or delivery pizza? I can, but maybe you can't. These are all questions you should ask yourself. What do I want? What do I really want? So when you're asking yourself, what kind of maintenance do I want to do with my property? What can I put up with? What do I want to spend my Sunday afternoons doing? One thing to consider is weeds. We didn't consider that when we bought this property. This is 32 acres proper. And since we bought this, we bought the adjacent 27 acres up the hill. But one thing we did not consider when we were buying this property is weeds. The county has a list of what they call noxious weeds. Poisonous weeds, I guess, for various animals, for people, weeds that grow out of control. And they have a right to basically force you to deal with your weeds. And if you don't deal with your weeds, the county will pay someone to deal with them and then send you the bill. So just something to consider. A couple years ago, I was working around the ranch and this car pulled down the driveway and they said they were from the county weed board. Believe it or not, we have a weed board. Maybe there's one where you live or where your property is that you want to buy. And this weed control board person, I call her the weed lady. So the weed lady asked me, she said, did you know you have such and such a weed? And I said, no, I never heard of it in my life. She said, yeah, it's over there by the driveway. There's about 4 plants. So they spend a lot of time driving around the middle of nowhere with binoculars, looking at your property, making sure that you don't have any weeds that are out of control. So word to the wise, Pay attention to stuff like that. Okay, now insert the word lifestyle. What lifestyle do I want? A lot of times, this ranch work and farm work and outdoor life, a lot of times it can be really appealing and look romantic and cozy on TV and in videos, but it's a lot of work. It's a lot of dust. It's a lot of conservation. You're always thinking about, I don't want to dry out the well. I don't want the weeds to get out of control. So there's a lot of reasons why everyone doesn't live out in the middle of nowhere, because it is a tremendous amount of work. What lifestyle do I want? Really? Or do you want a lifestyle where you have to be concerned with wildfires in the summertime, and you have to be concerned with walking around the side of your barn because you're not sure if there's a mountain lion back there, or a bear, or a moose, or a deer? There's an endless number of words you can insert, a couple of them to think about. What type of soil do I want? What type of privacy do I want? What type of internet connectivity do I want? So your want list might sound simple from the get-go, but you really have to think deeply on what it is you want, what it is you can deal with, and what it is you can deal without. You know, I was just mentioning wildfires. Check that out. I don't know what that is for sure. It appears to be a wildfire of some sort, so I'll check on that later. Yeah, no bueno. It's only May. Too early for wildfires, but you never know around here. Are you willing to put up with that? Okay, the next big question to ask yourself is, what do I need? Aside from how much land or how big of a parcel I need, which sometimes is more of a want than a need, utilities come to mind. So in most jurisdictions, in order to build a house, you need a septic system and you need water. We're fortunate because on Red Moose Ranch, the well was already installed when we bought the property. Very fortunate because it produced good water, clean water, had it tested a few years ago. Everything still looks good and it tastes great. But not everyone is so lucky, so be careful when it comes to water. If the parcel of land you're looking at has a well, how deep is the well? Does the DOE, the Department of Ecology, do they have records on that well? A lot of times they will have well logs, which includes the depth of the well, the gallons per minute, water test. And in fact, if it doesn't have a well, check with DOE anyway, because they could tell you maybe in the area, surrounding areas, neighborhood, how deep wells are and the water quality and that sort of thing. That's always very good to know. The well on Red Moose Ranch here is about 250 feet. That is very deep compared to the coast, where the average might be 50 feet, but that's not very deep compared to other places in the state. For example, my wife lived in a place where her well was about 1,000 feet deep. That's deep. And know that if you have to drill your own well, it could cost you big time. Anywhere from, I'm gonna put a range here, 10,000 to 50,000. I know it's a huge range, but there are so many variables. You might drill twice before you find water. You might have to go 1,000 feet deep. Depends on your area, but that is a real expense that you have to watch out for. Talk to a few well drillers in your area or a few pump guys. Know your water rights. In this state, you automatically have water rights if you have an individual well serving an individual house. So you are granted those water rights. But do you need water commercially? Are you going to grow food that you plan on selling commercially? Or do you have livestock that need water? Those are all questions you should ask yourself. Part of the expense of having a well is having the components that go along with it. Obviously the pump that is in the bottom of the well, but then you have the pressure tank. In our situation, the pressure tank sits in the bottom of a concrete pit that was set near the well. So if you don't know how pressure tanks work, basically they fill up, the pump runs, fills up the pressure tank, and then there's a bladder that is held tight with air inside that metal tank. And so that way the pump doesn't have to run every time you open up the faucet. So let's say you have an 80-gallon pressure tank. You might be able to use 50 gallons of water with that air squeezing that bladder in there, squeezing that water out before that pump has to actually kick on again. And you might want to also consider storage tanks, water spigots for your garden, fire suppression. There's a lot to think about. You've probably heard the phrase that water is life. That is really true when you're buying vacant land. If you have no viable source for water, I don't think you want to be responsible for hauling water into your home. That would be a pain in the butt. Depending on where you look for land, know the land's weaknesses and the land's strengths. And what I mean by that is, let's use the coast of Washington, for example, as opposed to Red Moose Ranch. On the coast, I rarely have seen wells fail, actually dry up. I would be willing to buy a piece of vacant land on the coast without a well on it. However, here, completely different story. I would never buy a parcel of land unless I knew the situation with the water very well. The antithesis is true with septic systems. I would buy a parcel of land, in fact we did, we bought this parcel of land that did not have an approved septic system at the time. Now if I was on the coast, I would never buy a piece of vacant land without an approved septic system, or at least I was very confident there was going to be an approved septic system, because it could be a disaster over there. It is wet. Jurisdictions no longer like gravity-fed systems. They're becoming more and more expensive all the time. Here, it's not the case. Generally, soils drain very well here, pretty sandy here. In fact, here's a story for you. When we bought this parcel, it had actually had a septic approval about 10 years prior to us buying this property. And so therefore it was expired. So after we owned this property a couple months later, I wanted to build that cabin. So I asked about that septic design and getting it updated. Now, if I was on the coast, you'd probably have to rehire the engineer, draw up the design, or at least approve a design, but not here. I went to the county and I said, apparently this septic was approved like 10 years ago. What do I need to do? They said, gosh, the soils haven't changed. You're approved. Stamp. It was just that easy. So know your jurisdictions, know the land's strengths and weaknesses. So speaking of septic, let's talk about septic system. As I just mentioned, this property didn't have one, but I wasn't worried about it because they're usually a piece of cake in this type of climate. So is your land going to be big enough to accommodate a septic system? A gravity septic system? Gravity septic systems are usually the cheapest kind, where literally gravity takes the effluent through the whole process from your house downhill to the tank, and then once your tank hits a certain level, then it dumps into the drain field, which is again just via gravity. There are many different types of systems, usually a lot more expensive than that. So will a gravity system with a full drain field, will that fit on your land? How about a backup drain field? Some places require you to have extra land for a backup drain field in case your first one fails. And what about a septic system and a well? Typically they have to be at least 100 feet apart, if not more, depending on where you live. Will the property perk? Has there ever been some perk tests done? What is a perk test, you might ask? A perk test is basically when a contractor digs a hole, usually a backhoe bucket, or sometimes you can dig other like small post hole type things. But typically they take a backhoe bucket and they dig down about 5-6 feet and they fill it up with water to see how quickly that water will be absorbed into the ground. You want it to absorb relatively quickly, but not too quickly either, because if you don't have enough organic materials and it's just sand, a lot of times the effluent or the bad parts of it just goes right through the sand and into the water table. You don't want that. Just more stuff to think about. What other need do you have? Power. Whether it's solar or wind or on the grid like we are here, you'll need power. What kind of power does your property have? What kind of power is available there? Is it nearby? Is it across the road? Are you going to put your own power in? You're going to have an electrician do it. You're going to do solar? How big of a system are you going to do? There's a lot of questions when it comes to power. So lucky for us, the power was actually on the road on our side of the road. But not so lucky is we didn't want our house that close to the road. So anything more than about 250 feet, the power company is going to have to set a new transformer. And that's what happened here. It all started with this transformer box right here that is right next to the road. So from this box, it heads down the canyon under the ground. I hired a private contractor with a vibratory plow, which is basically a blade that sticks in the ground. I think it was 3.5 feet. And at the same time this big blade cut through the ground, it inserted or laid a wire in conduit. And this wire terminates at the new transformer box that the power company put in. From the new transformer, wires go to a meter base. I was responsible, or the homeowner is responsible for putting up the meter base. If you don't know what you're doing electrically, I would say hire an electrician. Almost everything you have to do electrically has to be permitted with the state in our case. And remember, when you're putting up a meter base, make sure to have some outside receptacles on that meter base so you can start construction immediately. Even if you have cordless tools, they're still going to have to be charged somehow. The power company then hooks up that main wire from the transformer and hooks up your meter base. Now you're ready to go. So from your meter base to whatever building you have or want power in, you're going to have to do that yourself or hire a contractor / electrician to take care of that stuff for you. It's all an expense to think about. Another option for power is to install solar, like I did in this ridge cabin. Here, I'll show you. So this is a very simple solar setup. It's about the cheapest and most simplest system I can think of. This was actually a Harbor Freight system originally, but the main panels that are sitting right here and the controller were all part of this system from Harbor Freight. It's just a 100-watt system, 100-watt panels, actually 25-watt panels. There's 4 of them. Panels go through the controller. That just controls how much is charging. You don't want to charge your battery to the point where it blows up. So this controls all of that. From here, this is plugged into the battery. The battery is plugged into the inverter. So the inverter basically converts the DC power, the battery power, to AC power, which is the regular current you find on grid. So that's what this orange plug-in right here does. That is actually kind of like an extension cord that runs to the wiring inside the walls in the cabin. So that's what powered the light that you saw. And I also have a few outlets scattered around the cabin as well. I'm no expert on solar, but if you're gonna put it in your house, you're pretty much gonna have to be an expert on solar. You're gonna have to know how much you'll need. That's above my pay grade. You'll have to consult a professional for that. By the way, I did put that solar setup system. I did put that on video. I made a video on that system. So watch that if you want to. I also made a video on building this cabin. Well, several of them. Check it out if you want to. No pressure. Another question to ask yourself is, do you need a road put in? Does this road require more than just a gravel top coat? Does it require 4 or 5 inch material underneath that gravel? How much is that going to cost you? And does this road need a culvert? Ours did. Do you need fencing for your critters? Does the property have fencing already there? If it has fencing, who's taking care of the fence? I grew up in the state of Iowa, and it's pretty common back there that if you look at a fence line, you're responsible for the right half of that fence line. I'm not 100% sure how it is here, but you might want to know that sort of a thing. If you don't have critters, you might be telling yourself, I don't need a fence. I don't care. Well, think about this though. Let's say you buy a piece of land in the middle of nowhere and it's in an open range area. Well, in an open range area, cattle can roam free and it's up to you to keep them off of your property. So consider that as well. Need garbage services? We don't have any out here. Occasionally we just go to the dump ourselves and take care of it. There might be a local person with a truck that'll pick it up for a fee and haul it to the dump, but that's just an expense that you're gonna have if you decide to go that route. Do you need high-speed internet? Is satellite gonna be good enough for your needs? Do you need gas? You won't find natural gas here, but you might find propane. So we all have different needs, lots of needs. We just have to determine what exactly those are. Really focus on the word need, because often we get it confused with what we want. Those are 2 different things. You know, if you're new to this channel, you might be asking yourself about this point in the video, should I subscribe? Yes, that's my answer. I think you should subscribe. And hit that like button if you like this sort of thing. And if I haven't told you already, I'm glad you're here. I appreciate you watching. The third big question you should ask yourself is, can I afford this? That's a tough one. To that I say, Only you can answer that, but I will add, it probably will cost more than you think. The short answer is, it depends. Let's say you have a budget of $100,000. That might buy you 20 acres with a view. That might buy you 10 acres with a well. It might buy you 2 acres that's irrigated down in the valley. Or it could buy you 100 acres of nothingness in the middle of a desert. So we all know that part is infinitely variable. But here's a few other considerations. Do you have a lot of cash on hand? If you don't, there's probably only 3 ways to buy property, vacant land anyway, that I can think of. One is traditional lending. And that comes with a caveat because a lot of traditional lending don't want to deal with vacant land. And when they do, it's usually at a 1 to 2 percentage points higher interest rate than if you were to finance a home. Another possible option, if the seller is open to it, is seller financing, or having the seller carry a contract is another way to put it. It's where you put a down payment down, usually a hefty down payment, give it to the seller directly, and then that seller will take monthly payments from you for a determined amount of time. Usually there's a balloon involved where you might make monthly payments for 2 years or 5 years, and then at the end, you have to get a loan and pay him off, or he's taking his property back. Something to consider. And the most expensive way to approach this is with a personal loan or a hard money loan or your cousin Guido, or nothing against people whose name is Guido. I'm just saying, when Guido's involved, it might cost you more than money. So beware. How did we buy this vacant land when we did? Well, it really all starts with making a bad investment on the coast. I just bought my second rental property, and that was back in the days when I thought I was going to be a slumlord and own 20 rental properties. Well, on that second rental property, I discovered that it is really all about location, location, location. That was in a bad location, and I could not get good renters in there. So I lost money with every renter I had. So luckily, I was able to fix up the property myself and sold it for a profit. I took that little profit that I made and bought this property with that. So luckily, we didn't have to originate a loan just to buy this property. Other expenses to consider are building costs. Generally, if you're building something in the middle of nowhere and you're not building it yourself, it's going to cost more, especially more than a lot in town, for example. Materials may be tougher to get. They will be more expensive to get to you if you're in a remote spot. Contractors might charge more because of gas and diesel costs to get to you. Do you have to have special engineering for your site? Do you have to have trees removed? Can you do all that yourself? Is a survey needed to make sure your neighbor's not encroaching on your property or you're encroaching on theirs? Another hidden cost can be insurance, as in homeowners insurance. Most people don't even think about that at this stage in the game, but you really should consider it. And you'll have to consider it if you end up getting a loan, because that lender will require that you insure the house or whatever it is you're going to build. But a lot of homeowners insurance companies do not want to insure properties in the middle of nowhere for several reasons. Because it does cost more to rebuild, because of the fire danger. The property might be too far away from the nearest fire station or the nearest fire hydrant. I actually have a pretty good story that emphasizes that point about homeowners insurance and not liking remote properties with the risk of fire. I had a homeowner's policy in place on this property to protect the buildings. Well, about 3 years ago, I got a letter saying that was canceled, that there was no more insurance. Well, that was a big deal to me, so I wanted to find out immediately what was going on. Here's what they said. They said, because of your remoteness, you are more susceptible to wildfires. And they added, because this place is located where there's lots of snow, there's a chance in the wintertime that they couldn't be able to get the fire trucks in here because of snow in our driveway. So think about that. Wildfires usually don't happen in the wintertime, but that was their big excuse. Long story short, I argued with them. I told them I was going to make sure that the driveway would always be plowed, and they reinstated my insurance policy. So that was a little hairy there for a while. So think about things like that. When you do find an insurer, it might cost you more. And finally, I touched on this earlier, maintenance. How much maintenance is going to be required on your property? Do you have to buy a tractor and a mower and a brush hog, and a snowplow, and a blade, and a road grader. You see my point. Weed control. Are you gonna spray it? Are you gonna dig it by hand? Are you gonna pay someone to do it? Another consideration. So again, a word of advice regarding the finances. It'll probably cost you more than you think. So do your homework. The fourth big question to ask yourself is, what red flags should I be looking out for? Well, the first thing that comes to mind is just making sure that the property is buildable and looking out for those red flags that would indicate that maybe it's not buildable. Being from Washington, especially working on the coast and selling real estate over there, often ran across properties that had wetlands, wetland buffers, shorelines, steep slopes. Almost all of those things will prohibit you from building. And you don't want that, obviously, if you're buying land to build. Most of the time, the state and federal government, they are really protective of their wetlands. My own personal take is stay away from wetlands. You're not supposed to touch the wetlands at all, even if it's on your property. If it's a wetland buffer, I don't even know what the rules are for sure. I know you can't build a permanent structure on there. I don't even think you can put like a garden or anything to that nature on a wetland buffer. So make sure you do your due diligence there. Pull up some topo maps. Maybe the county has information as far as aerials and how wet the ground is. A lot of times the wetlands and the buffers are delineated right on the public maps, so it might be pretty easy to find out. Obviously, if you're in the mountains like we are here, you don't have to worry about such a beast. We have our own concerns like wildfires and mountain lions. Another red flag would be if you had your soil tested and it came back contaminated. Obviously, a big question is, why is it contaminated? How long has it been contaminated? Make sure your property isn't being used or hasn't been used for an illegal dumping site or manufacturing narcotic or cooking meth or anything like that, because not only can those things ruin the soil, but they can also create a cloud on the title. So make sure you do a title search and find out everything you can about the property. But that type of cloud, for me, would be a deal breaker. The third red flag would be endangered species. Sometimes this information is found on public sites, county sites. It might list right on there that the property is in a zone that might be conducive to spotted owls, for example. Most of us remember the stories about the spotted owls. I think it was in the 80s in the Pacific Northwest, and how they basically shut down the timber industry for a large period of time. More recently, again on the coast, we had an issue with pocket gophers. Pocket gopher. It's a little gopher that's protected federally. If you have pocket gophers on your property, you can't build on your property unless you mitigate the issue with the pocket gopher, offer it a new home, remove them. There's a couple of remedies, but it's a nightmare. Personally, I wouldn't want to deal with that either. But a pocket gopher, I'm an animal lover. Even though I'm a hunter, I am an animal lover, and I really appreciate wildlife of any sort. But a pocket gopher? You can't eat them. You can't wear their fur. They don't produce any milk or any wool. They don't sound pretty. They don't look pretty because no one ever sees them. Whatever you and I might think of the value of a pocket gopher, doesn't matter. Just make sure they don't exist on a property you're going to buy. Or any other endangered species. Just watch out for those things. Moratoriums. Now, a moratorium a lot of times happens when, for example, you used to have timber in the property and you harvested a certain amount of timber. Well, in order for you to be able to do that, the local jurisdiction will put a moratorium on you building anything on that parcel. Fine, you can harvest the trees, but the ground has to sit vacant and untouched for a determined amount of time. It could be 7 years or 9 years. I don't know if there's any specific time frame there, but it's a long time, and it could stop you from building when you buy the property. If you bought the property in year 2 and there's still 5 years left on a building moratorium and you can't build right away, well, then you're out of luck. And about the only way to get around that, if they will allow it, is for you to pay a hefty fine. I don't even know if that's possible everywhere, but just know that could be a big pain. Something else to watch out for are the tax classifications that aren't residential. A lot of times I see vacant land transactions where the vacant land that they're selling is listed as maybe agriculture land or timber land or open space. All of those tax classifications mean that you pay less money in taxes. And what that also means that if you buy it and you want to build a house on it, you either can't build a house on it in its current classification, or you have to pay back taxes to get it out of that classification. And that can cost you tens of thousands of dollars. Sometimes you have to pay back taxes for 5 years, 7 years. I think it also depends on the jurisdiction, and that could put you in a big bind, and it could also cost you more money than you thought. Another red flag would be a piece of land that's for sale that's been on the market for 3 years, or one that has been pending and then back on the market and then pending and then back on the market. That's a red flag. There's probably something wrong with it. So again, do your due diligence. Talk to your agent if you have one. Talk to the listing agent if you don't have one, which I'll get to that in a little bit. Do research at the county, ask the questions, just do your homework. So before we jump into the big question number 5, the final big question to ask yourself, I wanted to give you a little bit of news. I mentioned earlier in this video, and of course everyone who's a regular knows, we're beginning the process of building a house. Well, since we just talked about financing a few minutes ago, I wanted to let you know that our goal, like when we bought the property, is to not have a loan. We don't have a loan on any of this right now, and we don't want a loan to build our house either. So to that end, I have some, I guess, maybe unfortunate news. You call it whatever you want. I'm happy I'm able to do it. My wife Karen and I have decided to sell the spur cabin property. Now, we built the spur cabin on that property about a year ago, built a kitchen alongside of it. We love it. We wish we didn't have to sell it, but we don't want a loan worse. Does that make sense? By the time this video comes out, that property will be on the market. So please don't contact me with questions about that property. I will put a link, or I'll put some information in this video description about where you can contact or who you can contact, just in case you were curious about it or wanted to know. So that's the big news. It's bittersweet in that we would have loved to kept it forever, but it's just not in the cards. And it's sweet because we're going to use that money to build this house, and it's all going to work out. It has to. That's the whole purpose of this channel. So we're going to move forward, easy or not. We're going to build that house. And be sure to stay tuned, because in a couple of weeks, I'll be producing a video that talks about the beginning process of planning, engineering, all that stuff. It's a process, it's involved, but we'll get through it. So the 5th and final big question to ask yourself is, how can I protect myself during the buying process? How can I make sure that land is what I want before I buy it? Well, there's several ways. The most important level of protection that I can think of, and this is not to bolster my former industry, real estate, but the biggest level of protection is to get an expert agent that you trust and that trusts you. It does go both ways. And in order to get that agent that you trust, I would highly suggest narrowing down your search to a specific, for sure, a state. A city would be better, a county would be acceptable, but just in a specific area that an agent will feel comfortable working, and an area that that agent will know about. So if at all possible, find an agent, build up that relationship. Make sure that agent or that broker knows exactly what you want. Make sure that broker has sold vacant land before, and build that relationship so that he or she keeps an eye on the market, can guide you through the process, and can help you avoid those pitfalls. If you do get to that point where you have an agent and you have a great relationship, don't call the listing agent. Don't call anyone but your agent. For sure, don't call the listing agent. Don't call the seller directly. You don't want to do that, because if you do that, you're going to erode the trust with that agent, and then the relationship is soured. Another thing you don't want to do after you get a good relationship with a broker is do your own searching on the internet, for a couple of reasons. One, you shouldn't have to, because the broker's doing that for you. Two, the information that you find on the internet isn't always the right information. It isn't always accurate. I have had countless examples where people called me up, want to know about a property that was sold 6 weeks ago. So this goes back to that trust issue. Trust that your agent is doing that job. If they're not, fire them. It's that simple. Familiarize yourself with the market. With or without a broker, your broker, do some research. Find out the properties that have sold. How much did they sell for? How big were they? What type of financing did they need? So of the sold properties, how long were they on the market? Did they have several price reductions? Has it been listed before? All that stuff is good to know. And the more education you have, the better it is and the more protected you'll be. Number 3 is called a feasibility contingency. Most sellers of vacant land, in my experience, at least in this market, most sellers will accept an offer with a feasibility contingency. Now that is exactly what it sounds like. It is an offer that was accepted, earnest money has been granted, and it's under contract. It is pending, but it is contingent on a feasibility that you and your broker perhaps, but that you will do with the property. That feasibility can include quite literally anything. Is it feasible to build on the property? Is it feasible to put the driveway in where you want it? Is it feasible to drill a well? Is it feasible to have a septic system? Is it feasible for you to get a loan on the property? What are any environmental issues with the property? What does the title search show? Is this property divided into the smallest parcels it can be? What are the utilities? What are the utility costs going to be? Do you have to put in a road? How much is it going to cost you to put in a road? Do you need a timber crews, meaning someone to evaluate the timber on the property? Because that can affect the value. Does the property have any CC&Rs that will affect your building or affect what you want to do with the property? Will it keep you from having a home-based business, for example? Will the CC&Rs keep you from building that 4-story pink house you've always wanted? Will the CC&Rs prevent you from having animals that are bigger than dogs? There's a myriad of things that CC&Rs affect. And CC&Rs, by the way, covenants, conditions, and restrictions. Those are all items that run with the property. They're on title and they stay with that property forever in most cases. So take a look at those CC&Rs or any other restrictions that may come with that property. So this is really a great level of protection. This is a great tool to have. If you think you want to move forward on a property, you tie it up, and while you tie it up, you have that feasibility contingency. The caveat is almost all of these costs are going to be on you. Yeah, once in a while you'll have a feasibility contingency and you'll find out that it just won't work for you. In that case, you get your earnest money back as long as you're within the timelines of the contract. You'll get your earnest money back. Seller will put the property back on the market. No harm, no foul. At least you're protected that way. Last but not least, well, perhaps least effective as far as protecting you, are the disclosures. In this state, a seller is required to disclose everything they know about the property. A lot of times though, with vacant land especially, you'll have an owner that might live in another state and they might have never been on the property. A lot of these parcels, especially out in the middle of nowhere, might have been owned by your grandpa and then someone passed it down, and next thing you know, the owner's living in New York and the property's in the middle of Wyoming, never been there, knows nothing about it. So in that case, it's not going to help you one bit. But I would ask for it, see if the seller does have any information, and see if there is that disclosure out there. If there is, it could help you. But ultimately, it's up to you to either prove or disprove anything you may find in the disclosure, if there is any. And you do this proving or disproving during the feasibility contingency period. That's when you find out everything there is to find out. So how many of you have bought your own vacant land? How many of you have built a house on that vacant land? Did you build it yourself? Do you have a contractor do it? I'd be curious to know. Well, those are the 5 big questions you should ask yourself when you're buying vacant land. I hope I didn't scare you out of the idea. I actually wish more people would buy land in the middle of nowhere and build their dream. And if you'd like to watch me build our dream, come back next week. I have a video out every Friday, so you don't want to miss it. We're going to be working around the ranch, ton of projects to do here, and of course, we're going to be building that house. So I hope to see your face next week. In the meantime, you take care of yourself. I'll see you soon.